And so after that final game, I knew that I was able to walk away on my own terms. And it wasn't because I was washed up or I couldn't do it anymore. I was walking away because it was my decision. And there's a lot of power in that. And, a week after that final game was when I really experienced the finality of what that meant. And I felt the void in my heart from breaking off my engagement, letting go of this dream. My parents were unsupportive. Like, the only a few of my teammates even could comprehend why I would do something like this and let go of all this money, all this fame, like this childhood dream. And I don't really know why at the time. Like, obviously I've been on this deep healing journey, but looking back on it now, it's just this calling in my heart that this is time. And you need to go discover the deeper truths of who you are and this reality. And there's just because I'd made a bunch of money. I'd been living my dream. I'd basically had everything, like you talked about at the beginning of the show, of what society tells you will give you happiness. And there was still something missing in my life. And I had this deep desire to know what that was.
All right, welcome to another episode of the Ancient Futurist Podcast. Today, I'm sitting down with Joe Hawley, who is a former NFL star who played for the Falcons and the Buccaneers in the NFL and decided to walk away from the game after 8 seasons, leaving him with a void of purpose, identity, and community. This transition propelled him on a journey of deep healing and self-discovery that led him to then travel nomadically in his van across the U.S. for 2 years in search of an answer to the simple question of who am I? And this quest led him toward a wider way of healing modalities, including yoga and plant medicine, and he's found his purpose through transformational wilderness expeditions that he hosts through his business, the Härt Collective. And he's also an author, speaker, and host of a popular podcast called Life Beyond the Game. And he also owns a retreat center and a regenerative farm 90 minutes outside of Austin called Haven. So he's got a really interesting story, and we're going to start from the top here. So after playing college football at the University of Nevada in Vegas, Joe, you were drafted into the NFL by the Falcons, which by nearly all standards, and I'm sure yours as well, obviously, is a dream come true and basically the ultimate mama, we made it. So before we jump into the story, I just want to say one thing, like your journey, which we're about to discuss, is so powerful because it's another testament to the fact that despite how much we often like to convince ourselves that, like, man, if I had this, or even comparisons, like if I had what he has or she has or whatever, like I'd be full or complete or living my best life forever. And there's such a strange disconnect between desire and fulfillment, right? And like, my point is that within our culture, there's this widespread mind virus that programs us into a scarcity mindset, which causes us to focus on the wrong metrics for finding that true fulfillment, like looking for something external to ourselves rather than that metric being internally focused and self-generating that fulfillment regardless of our circumstances. So obviously that's so much easier said than done, but I think a lot of us realize at some point that finding that within ourselves is the ultimate goal and the only way to that true long-lasting freedom. And correct me if I'm wrong, but that internal dialogue seems to be a large facet of how your journey has and continues to unfold. And so I know you probably told this story 10 million times, so we don't need to spend too long on it specifically. But for anybody unfamiliar, I would like you to run us through how we get from you being drafted in the NFL to you initially making the decision to retire from the league after 8 seasons, buy a van, adopt your dog, and explore nomadic living.
Yeah, man. Thanks for having me, first off, man. And well said on kind of the societal program that we're all born into, and breaking out of it and breaking and shifting this paradigm is really the work that we're all being called to do. And it's deep, man. I'm continuing to access deeper and deeper layers of freedom and discovery and where I'm trapped and where I'm holding on. And, that journey continues. Yeah, man, it was really cool to hear all of that reflected back to me too. I'm just now getting to a place where I'm integrating that past part of myself. I've retired in 2017 was my last year. So it's been 5 years, and it's been one hell of a journey to integrate that. I've had a lot of shame and yeah, just a lot of different woundings around, that part of myself. And so it has been a journey. And so to answer your question, getting drafted that was it, man. That's the dream. That's like every kid that ever played football is like, I want to get drafted. I want to hear my name called on draft day. And it was really beautiful. It was a beautiful experience. I had a really good draft process coming out of a small school like UNLV. We never had a winning season as I was there. So the odds of me getting drafted were pretty slim. Had a really good draft process. Ended up getting drafted in the 4th round, which was a dream come true. But on reflection, on my life, that was really where the journey started. And getting drafted to the Falcons, I was a 21-year-old kid. I went in there, got drafted to replace a long tenured center. He was like 13. I think it was his 12th year at the time. And it was a really old team that had been together for a long time. So coming in as this kid, it was really one of the most challenging experiences, like being one of the best players on every team I ever played on. And then going in and playing with the best in the world. There was a lot of, imposter syndrome. Like, do I belong here? What am I doing here? And it was, that first year was really, really challenging. And for me as a player, the reason I went to UNLV is because I loved playing the game. Like I went there because I wanted to play right away. I hated sitting on the bench because when I sat on the bench, I felt like I wasn't a contributor, even if the team was successful. And so that rookie year, I was actually on the sideline as a backup, and we went 13-3, number 1 seed in the playoffs. But there was a part of me that didn't feel like I was actually a part of the team, and ended up getting my first opportunity to start. My second year, I was out of position at guard, and there's a lot here. I ended up going through so like a really up and down career, and I want to kind of condense it because I feel like we can talk about a lot, and I don't want to go through this linear story. I'm actually writing a book right now on this journey of what it took to make it in that hyper competitive environment, and the journey of, I lost my starting job 5 different times throughout my career, and what it took to earn that job back, and eventually getting to the point where I went into my final year, my 8th year, and I lost my starting job to a younger guy for the 5th time. And there was something that happened when I was on the sidelines. I was in my street clothes. They had signed me back to like a $2.5 million deal, and they told me I was going to be competing for my starting job with this younger guy. But what I realized after they gave him the job is they just brought me back to mentor him because he was a younger guy and they wanted a veteran there. And so we called this is known as living the dream, as being a veteran that's a backup that's brought back to be a mentor. So I was actually not an active player. I was in my street clothes on the sideline. And every single time in my career where I would lose a starting job, one time I got replaced by a top draft pick in the college draft and got replaced by him, had to earn my job back. 4 games into earning my job back, I blew my knee out and then had to recover from that, got my starting job back. And then this happened, lost it to a younger guy. They brought me back to mentor. But every single time that happened, there was this passion, this fire that I just needed to prove myself. I loved this game so much. I loved the pure competition on Sundays that I just would do anything to get back out there. And this final year, I was standing on the sideline and I was getting the team pumped up as the offense was about to take the field. And the offense took the field and I stayed behind and I was just watching. And it was just the most strange experience because the first time in my entire career, I was actually content without having to play. In fact, I was happy. I was joyous. I was like, wow, I get to get paid. I get to have best seats in the house and I get to support these guys, but I no longer have to put my body on the line and, just really compete at that level, there's so many layers of how challenging it is. And in that moment, I knew this is going to be my final year playing. And I'm really grateful for that because it allowed this opportunity to be extremely present through my final year. A lot of athletes, face the challenge of their careers usually taken away from them before they're ready. Very few give the sport everything they have and decide on their own terms to walk away. And so that final year was really beautiful. I ended up being very present, even with the challenging parts. When I'd have an attitude of like, I don't want to be here, I don't want to do this, there was none of that because I was like, this is it. There's the finality to this. And, it was really cool because as I was on the sideline, I wanted to make sure that I was ready for an opportunity. I didn't want to let my team down. I knew I was retiring. I didn't really tell anybody on the team or anything. A few of my teammates knew, but I tried to stay in game shape in case my number was called. And that's really hard to do in the NFL because practices get considerably easier as the season goes on because there's not a lot of bodies. So a lot of the starters are resting up. And so it just becomes more like a walkthrough. And so to stay in game shape was just really challenging. And I think it was like 5 weeks left before the end of my career, end of the season, 2 offensive linemen go on IR in the same game. And so I go into the next game, and during this time I was deconstructing, like looking at like all of my life, not just my football career, but I started questioning, who am I? Like, what am I here to do? And I ended up telling my fiance at the time that this is gonna be my last year playing football. And she was actually unsupportive of that. And that's when I realized, oh, this is not just a decision that affects me and me walking away and stripping away this identity. Every single person in my life that I've ever met knows that Joe Hawley is an NFL player, and they put me on some type of pedestal within their own projection of who I am. And so dealing that with my fiance, the true colors kind of were shown, and I ended up realizing maybe this isn't for the best. And I had to end up spending the entire year in my personal life deconstructing that relationship. And during that time, so 5 games left in the season, 2 guys go down. I go into the following week knowing I'm going to start against Green Bay in Lambeau Field. At the same time, I'm basically going through this really challenging breakup and really letting go of that relationship. So I was really stressed, and this is the first time I've ever had an experience of a psychosomatic emotional connection to my physical body, because I showed up on Saturday before we traveled to Green Bay, and I just became deathly ill. And I was sick, and I was throwing up, and I was like shitting water, and I was like, what the fuck is wrong with me? And I thought it was just like a stomach bug. And it ended up happening, like, okay, we're gonna travel with you, and we're just gonna pump you full of fluids, and we're gonna make sure you try and get you to play on Sunday. And it wasn't until like 2 hours before the game, I'm just like wrenched over in front of my locker. I'm like, coach, I can't play. And so they finally like, okay, and they ended up going with the next guy who was like a practice squad guy, because 2 guys had already been hurt. And it was fascinating because as soon as the game started, I was on the sideline. I felt better. Like, I didn't feel like 100%, but that pain and that visceral like sickness subsided almost instantly. And I was like, that's so strange. Like, how much of this is connected to the stress of, am I good enough to play with these guys still? Like, there's this performance anxiety, and there's a stress I was experiencing at home. And so what I started to ponder was like, maybe this is like ulcers. Like, I've heard about ulcers and how they can be formed from stress. And so I went to the doctor on Monday, and I was like, hey, I want to get a picture taken of my stomach. I think it's ulcers. And this brings into the conflict of interest between the medical staff in the locker room and the players. And we don't need to get too deep into that, but pretty much they're like, no, it's not, it's not ulcers. Like, you're fine. It's just a sickness. And I had to basically put my foot on the ground and say, I want to get pictures taken, and like, I'm doing this for me. And so I ended up going to the doctor. They put a scope down my throat. And sure enough, there's 2 big ulcers burning in the side of my stomach. Gave me the proper medication, and I was able to heal that. And then what's really beautiful about this experience is I was able to start those last 4 games in my career. And there was a lot of fear of like, can I still play? Can I still perform? Do I belong here with the best in the world? And it was almost as if the universe gave me this opportunity to go play the game that I loved. And I played 4 of the best games of my entire career. And so after that final game, I knew that I was able to walk away on my own terms. And it wasn't because I was washed up or I couldn't do it anymore. I was walking away because it was my decision. And there's a lot of power in that. And, a week after that final game was when I really experienced the finality of what that meant. And I felt the void in my heart from breaking off my engagement, letting go of this dream. My parents were unsupportive. Like, the only a few of my teammates even could comprehend why I would do something like this and let go of all this money, all this fame, like this childhood dream. And I don't really know why at the time. Like, obviously I've been on this deep healing journey, but looking back on it now, is just this calling in my heart that this is time, and you need to go discover the deeper truths of who you are and this reality. And there's just these, because I'd made a bunch of money. I'd been living my dream. I'd basically had everything, like you talked about at the beginning of the show, of what society tells you will give you happiness. And there was still something missing in my life. And I had this deep desire to know what that was. And so I stripped it all away. I ended up buying a van. I gave away all my possessions to charity, and just really, like, literally let go of an entire way of being, and just hit off on this quest, this pilgrimage to find myself. And that was 2 years of synchronicity after synchronicity. And that's where it's led me into this beautiful journey of self-discovery. And it's taught me so much about who I am, and that journey is continuing. We can dive into that, but ooh, what a journey.
Man, yeah, that is definitely a journey. And so another facet, before I start reflecting on some of the stuff that you just said, another facet that I know that you were also dealing with at the time was injuries and chronic pain, obviously resulting from playing football. And you played mainly O-line almost exclusively, right?
Yeah, I started 54 games at offensive line, mostly center. And then
Yeah.
I played in almost 100, I think like 90 games.
Wow. Yeah. And so, yeah, obviously, you were, like I said, you were apparently dealing with some chronic pain and injuries, and that caused you to take some steps to get more in tune with your body. And I'm curious how what kind of steps you took, and what decisions you made to start kind of attuning to that and trying to heal that. Cause I know you told me you were dealing with inflammation all the time and stuff like that. So I'm definitely curious to hear what you did there.
Yeah, man. I mean, it's fascinating to think back on what I was fueling my body as one of the, you know, best athletes in the world, and what I should have been eating and what I was actually eating. Like what I know now, like it makes me want to throw up what I was actually putting in my body and fueling my body. And it's fascinating how uh, our culture, like even the greatest athletes in our culture and society still don't understand like the way to properly fuel the body and what inflammation actually is. And we take a bunch of anti-inflammatories. I take pain pills. I was using cannabis and alcohol to like make myself feel better. All these things that were totally normal, but looking back on, obviously an issue. And it wasn't until my seventh year, actually going into my seventh year, um, it's like halfway through my career is when I started really getting more curious. I started reading more books and started expanding spiritually a little bit. And I was introduced to meditation. I grew up in a Christian faith, very dogmatic, closed-minded. And I was told that Eastern mysticism and meditation is how the devil makes its way into your mind. So there's like this real resistance to meditation from a spiritual perspective. But it was really beautiful that we had these like mindset coaches come in, and they talked about it from a very practical, performance-based. Like if we told you could reduce stress, improve your focus, improve your performance, like why wouldn't you do it? And they had this little app, and so I started doing it from this like non-spiritual lens, which helped me really understand the mind and how crazy the thought loops are that I was living in. And so that just set in the foundation for that. And then I started reading a little bit more books, and I was connecting with some different people. And there was a friend of mine that was really kind of on this path that we're on. And naturally when you're not on it, you like look at these people and it's like, whoa, they're like a little bit out there. And he was a lot more health conscious and like fueling his body. And he was telling me about, this paleo diet and how he's just limiting processed foods, like something super simple, like eat just natural. Like if you can kill it or grow it, like that's what you should eat. And that was a very novel concept to me back then. But I was like, you know what, let me give this a try. And so I went paleo and just basically like removed processed foods from my diet. And it like made me feel really good. But the challenge of it was, as an offensive lineman, to keep that weight on. So I went into my seventh year and I had lost like probably 10 or 15 pounds, which doesn't, like, as an offensive line that's 300 pounds, like I went from like 300, 295 to like 285, 280. And that 10 to 15 pounds really made a difference in my ability to strain and to hold up against these big ass defensive linemen. And so when they signed me back to my eighth year, they said, Joe, you're playing a little light. We need you to gain at least 10 to 15 pounds if you're going to come back. And so I was like, okay, I can't gain weight. Literally couldn't gain that weight if I was eating like natural food. So I started eating a little bit more shitty and like kind of went back to my old diet. And that was when I had a really visceral experience of how, you don't really know what feeling good feels like until you do it. And then I couldn't really recognize how bad shit made me feel until I reintroduced it. I was feeling lethargic and the inflammation and the pain. I was like, holy cow. And that was, one of the many variables that led to the decision of walking away. Is like, I'm tired of having to keep all this weight on. I'm tired of having to eat like shit. And I just don't feel good. And my body was starting to break down. I experienced quite a bit of injuries, like torn labrums in both my shoulders, bulging disc between C6, C7. I had total knee reconstruction with my ACL, MCL on my right knee. I had bone spurs in my ankles, like my hip flexor I tore 1 year. And so just all of that just started compounding, and one of the questions I asked myself was, how much am I going to do this? And I started contemplating and confronting the question of how much of my health am I going to sacrifice for more wealth? And I had made enough money to feel financially free. And so that gave me it became not about, okay, am I going to be making more money? It was like, how much of my life and longevity am I going to sacrifice for more money when I already have enough to be happy? And so all these things kind of started swirling around. And halfway through my career, a lot of the lawsuit around the CTE and the TBI and the brain trauma that NFL players experience. I think there was like a study they did of like a few hundred former players' brains, and 97% of them showed signs of CTE and TBI. So it wasn't a matter of if I have brain trauma, it's just how bad it is. And that created this really deep underlying fear of, if I break my arm, like I put it in a cast and heal it. If I pull a muscle, like I can rest it. But when you're talking about the brain, like the lens in which your consciousness inputs and sees reality, and it affects your mood, it affects everything. What is that experience like? Like people that experience dementia, they start going crazy. The only way they start really knowing that is because their friends and the people close to them reflect like, hey, are you okay? And so it's hard to even like comprehend what is it going to feel like to if I potentially start going crazy. And that was one of the things that I really started being more proactive, and it was about my brain health. It wasn't necessarily the pain and the inflammation in the body. It was like, okay, how can I be proactive with my brain health? I know I've already experienced plenty of concussions and trauma to my brain. I don't want to wait until I go crazy. So what can I do to be proactive with that? And I started learning about, foods that are good for the brain. There's a really good book called Genius Foods that specifically talk about foods that are good for the brain, like avocados, blueberries, almonds. So I started doing that and limiting high inflammatory foods because inflammation is the worst thing for the brain. And then starting to realize, okay, learning about neuroplasticity and neurogenesis and, the story that we were told when we were younger that you only have a certain amount of brain cells and if you lose them, you're fucked. And like, that was not true at all. Like there's plenty of studies where brains can like literally create and grow through new neural connections and new neural pathways. And how do you do that? Well, learning helps expand and create new neural pathways. Novel experiences and travel, that helps because you're constantly going into new environments and your brain has to like create new neural connections to through that experience. And then that led me into psychedelics. And I started understanding and looking at these studies of psilocybin and mushrooms. And I just was blown away that, okay, if I'm looking at neuroplasticity and neurogenesis, like these studies are showing just brains just lit up. And so that's what got me open to going down that path. And, like I said, with my upbringing with Christianity and the story around psychedelics is like, they're really scary. They open you up to like demonic forces. And I've had some stories of like all this fear. And so it took me until I think it was the end of my seventh year in that off season before my final year. And it's fascinating if you're starting to realize the timelines of all the things that kind of led to me walking away. I had my first mushroom experience. And then I shortly thereafter did LSD at a festival for the first time, and two really profound experiences. And it wasn't scary at all. It was beautiful, and it connected me with a deep presence. It was maybe the first time that in MDMA, first time I did MDA, it was like, wow, this is what love is. This is what presence is. And the monkey mind would just subside into pure presence and awareness. And that's what really led me on this path of like, how do I access that presence and still the stillness of my mind? And that's kind of what led me on this path of all that leading to getting in the van and traveling.
Right. And so you were in the van full time for how long?
So I hit the road in March of 2018. I had my first van. I lived for about 8 months, and that was a different experience because the van was a sports mobile. It was like a cargo van. It wasn't as comfortable. So I would say that was more of like a road trip. I stayed in a lot of hotels. I'd stay at friends' houses. I would go camping in like national parks. And I did that for about 8 months. And then I came back to Tampa during the winter time. And I was like, okay, and this is actually feeding into the story of how I found Fit for Service. I was actually traveling back, and it was getting cold. I had just gotten back from Peru and went to Machu Picchu, and there's pros and cons of being on the road, but I was a little bit exhausted. Like it wasn't it wasn't a lifestyle change. It was just more of a road trip. So I was constantly experiencing, meeting new people, and so I was like, oh man, I need a break. And so I remember like asking God, like, is this what now? Like, and I had a blog that I was doing YouTube videos. I was sharing the journey on Instagram. And so I was thinking like, do I want to focus on doing that? And the answer was no. Like, I don't want to be just a van life influencer, and I don't want to travel the rest of my life in this way. Like, I know I'm meant for something more. I know I'm meant for greater impact. And I was like, what next? Like, what am I supposed to do? And I was like, well, I'm just going to head back to Tampa, and I'm going to throw this podcast on. And I had just been introduced to Aubrey Marcus like a month before. My brother-in-law was like, you got to read this book. Like, this guy really knows what he's talking about. It was Own the Day, Own Your Life. Read through his book, really loved what he was about. This really successful entrepreneur that's talking about these spiritual concepts that like just rang so true for me. Like, it resonated. I'm like, oh man, it's like, that feels like such deep truth. And I've never heard anybody talk about it in that way. And so I put on one of his podcasts. I got a long, like 8-hour drive ahead of me, put on one of his podcasts, and it was the first podcast he talked about fit for service. And in my heart, it was just like, I'm supposed to do that. I know I'm supposed to do that. And so I ended up going back to Tampa, and I stayed in Tampa for 4 months, got a little apartment. And then this is my first experience of actually actively participating in a manifestation of something I desired. I was like, if I find a more comfortable van that I can live out of full time and actually do the van life thing, then I'll continue traveling. And so I set this little intention. It was the first time I did like a Joe Dispenza meditation, and I like visualized the van, and it was a brand new Mercedes-Benz Sprinter van, fully customized. It had a big queen size bed, a nice little kitchenette, and just all the bells and whistles. And I got invited to go to this tiny house festival to speak about, my experience. And I went there, and in the back corner, I walk up, and that was the exact van I had imagined in my awareness. And I walked in, and the guy's like, "Yeah, I'm selling it." I was like, "It's my van, I'll take it." And then I ended up traveling in that van for like another 6 months. And that was kind of during the time that I started Fit for Service. And I was able to really connect with people all over the country from Fit for Service and that I was meeting. And it was just epic.
Wow. Yeah, dude. I have a similar story of just kind of like finding Fit for Service out of nowhere. And it's really wild because I was really familiar with, and as you know, like that community there's something so magnetic about it, and people are magnetized for so many different reasons. And like you were saying before we started recording, like sometimes people end up there and they're like, I don't even know what I'm doing here, but I'm here. And then you just kind of find out like really quick, and like the butterfly effect that it has on everybody's lives through not even just the program, but more importantly, in my opinion, through the network of people, the profile of person who, for whatever reason, their wavelength is magnetized to this community, and it's just really joining like mine. So I was very familiar with Aubrey for a while. I've been watching his podcast and everything for years. And he always felt like a really kin soul to me, because I also at the time was running a big supplement company that I founded a couple years prior to discovering him. And I also was like, sitting with medicine and all these things, like we were just totally about like the same stuff. And so I found him really interesting. And it's funny because I tried to get him my music years before we met, and he's not an easy guy to get in touch with unless he wants to. So like I was, I was trying to get him music, and then Jason Havey, his CEO at the time, found my music and on an Instagram ad, hit me up and was like, "Yo, this is dope, da da da." And I was like, "Yo, I'd love for you to like show Aubrey. I have a feeling he would really be into this." So it was in like 2016, I don't remember, somewhere between 2016 and 2018. And he was like, "Yeah, I'll show him tomorrow." And tomorrow, Aubrey got in his car accident that he ended up getting all these kind of surgeries and stuff. So I obviously it was like, I never followed up on that. The next day, whenever Jason was going to show him my records, he like got in that crazy car accident. And so years passed by, like I just never tried again. It was like, something I wanted to try out. But and then all of a sudden I get an Instagram message one random day from Vylana, who I wasn't really familiar with her at the time. And her and Aubrey, basically they reached out because they were at Soltara co-hosting an ayahuasca retreat. This was like maybe 3.5 years ago now. And they were co-hosting an ayahuasca retreat there, and they were looking for music to play for the ecstatic dance at the end of the retreat in that Maloka, in the amazing Maloka at Soltara, which you've been to. And like the Spotify algorithm gods just served them my full album mix. It's the 27-minute mix, and they said that was all they needed. So they just played my full album for the whole thing or whatever, and they just like hit me up with these really nice messages and were like, da da da, like we found you. So it was really funny because I had been like trying to get them my music, and then in the exact set and setting that my music is made for, the algorithm just like bam, and then it hit them at the exact moment they need it. And they, obviously everybody there resonated with it enough for them to feel compelled to reach out to me, which was really nice. And so we started talking a lot back and forth after that. And I didn't know what Fit for Service was, but I had remembered our mutual friends, Jason and Megan, who are also, I believe that's how you guys connected, was because you were in Fit for Service and they were hanging around. I had heard Jason tell me the story about how when he was at Spirit Quest with Don Howard years before, it was like the first year of Fit for Service, whatever, and Aubrey and them all showed up there. And so he knew them that way. And so I was like, what is this thing? And I started just looking at the community and everything. And I was like, bruh, this seems like a squadron of human beings that are like on my wavelength that I would totally vibe with. And I was like, yes. And I would have never found it. I would have never looked into it had Vylana and Arby not reached out about my music and like told, so all that stuff. So then, I mean, here we are years later, a gazillion synchronicities later after being in that community. I mean, the butterfly effect is still unfolding every single day. And I mean, I have lifelong friends, business partner, just like so many things have unfolded for me in various ways since then, and it's just been really, really crazy to think about. But yeah, it all started with the Spotify algorithm thing for me, like in the perfect moment, just sending that out there into the universe.
You know what's crazy about that, dude? I was at that retreat
Oh, no
with
way.
Aubrey and Vylana.
Oh, no way.
Yeah, that was the first one. They brought everybody out there. I think it was in 2019, maybe.
It was like 19 or 20. It was like either late in the year or early in the year. Yeah. So you were there.
Yeah, because it was like a year after. Yeah, I was actually there, dude. That's crazy that even that connection is wild.
Dude, it is. And that's how Melissa, our mutual friend, the COO over there, that's how she first found out about me. And then she followed me on, this is another one of those little butterfly effect things. It's just a fun story. She follows me on Instagram. And then like months later after this, I was actually almost a year later, because it was for the solstice that December, I was going to Costa Rica to play a different event. And I had made this like post that had nothing to do with the event on Instagram, just talking about like the nature of the mind and like synchronicities, as a matter of fact. And she saw it and commented on it and was like, just want to let you know, like, you're invited to come drink at Soltara whenever you want. And I was like, I actually am going to be in Costa Rica like next week. So, and then she was like, where are you going to be? And
I'll take you up on
so
it.
she was like, well, can I invite myself to your show? And I was like, yeah, let's do it. So long story short, she ends up coming down way to Uvita, like, hours from where she's at up in the Nicoya Peninsula. And she just got introduced to like our whole little group of friends down there. And now we just vibe all the time. Like, me and Melissa are close, and just like, she's one of the greatest humans, dude. And like, just that's like another one of those little things. But it's funny you say that you were there at that retreat, because a year later, after my music being discovered through them at that Maloka, a year later, I found myself there with them, drinking with everybody in the same Maloka that crazy little synchronicity happened in. And it was just like super full circle and wild, dude. But yeah,
yeah, man, it's freaking fascinating. Even with like the first year of 2019, one of the really special things about that first cohort and that first group is that first summit was in Austin, and we all met each other. And I can feel it like it was yesterday. And that wasn't the best summit. It was before a lot of deep experiential process. It was like it was like a physical, because they split up the programming into quarters. It was like physical, mental, emotional, and spiritual. And so that first one was physical, and it was like, we did like a ropes course, and then they just had people kind of speak, but it wasn't the depth of connection. But the cool thing about that first year is every single person, you ask them like, why are you here? Like, what drew you in? And every single person, or most of the people, some people are just like, I want to be around Aubrey, and like, I want to, be more of like this. It's more focused on human optimization. But there's a lot of us that was like, I don't know, I just knew I was supposed to be here. Like, I felt it in my heart. And like my closest friends, closest family are from that experience. And it's been so profound to have that community. It's why I'm so passionate about building community, because that's where the magic happens. And that, what's the other co-founder of Soltara, Dan?
Yeah,
Dan. So Dan came in 2019. I remember him speaking about Soltara because they had just opened it to that first cohort. And it was interesting because when I was on the road, I was down in Tampa when I was taking that break, and I actually connected with this girl down there. And I was just down there for a couple months. She worked at this yoga studio, and we just started vibing. And she was like, hey, my friends just got back from this place doing ayahuasca, and they want to go back, and they invited me. Do you want to go with me? And I was like, yeah. So I actually purchased my first trip to Soltara before Fit for Service even started. And then Dan was there talking about it, and I was like, oh, dang, like I'm going there in a few weeks. And then I went down there, like I got drawn into Soltara even like outside of the thing. And then to see how it's like interweaving like a web of how it's connecting all of us. It's just really, really cool to be a part of.
It is, dude. It is most definitely like a mycelium of timelines that's just like every day it becomes more and more just like undeniable, this like just web of synchronicities. Alan Watts' wife, Jana Watts, used to talk about that. Actually, she would call it the web, and that was her description of Robert Anton Wilson writes about this in The Cosmic Trigger, and describes and writes about like the ways that she used to describe this web. But essentially, like when people start doing work in consciousness, that you find yourself immersed in this just undeniable web of synchronicities, which then inevitably pushes people, as Robert Anton Wilson talks about in The Cosmic Trigger, into what he calls chapel perilous, which is that state of consciousness where you're like left wondering like whether your life is being externally influenced by some kind of like metaphysical force, or if you're just fucking going nuts or whatever, and like how that's inevitable.
I'd love to get your so I'd love to get your perspective, because this came up when you were talking about the algorithm and it kind of serving in the perfect time. And you can have all these different ideas of technology and where we're headed with AI and the algorithms, and how they're really destructive in a lot of ways. But it's also this opportunity and this tool for consciousness to create even more opportunity for magic right every day within our phone. And it's really, really quite fascinating when you look at it through that lens. I'd love to get your perspective on kind of the technology and how it's interwoven in the good and the bad, and how it actually creates opportunity for God to create more synchronicities in our lives.
There's a million different ways to look at this, because it's like, there's advertisement algorithms, and those have pros and cons as well, because it's like, obviously you're not getting served a bunch of ads for shit that does not pertain to you like you used to in the past, or whenever social media ads weren't as prevalent or whatever. But, you're getting served with things that according to the thousands of data points that these platforms have on you, that they think will contribute value to your life, at least, or that you'll buy it, whether or not it's going to contribute value to your life. Yeah. So like, and then, with music algorithms, I love how the Spotify algorithm in particular works. Don't get me wrong. Spotify has kind of crushed musicians' abilities to make money directly from music, because streaming royalties are very, very low compared to like buying CDs or buying albums or even just buying songs on iTunes. But that said, it has opened up such a new world of music discovery. And so if your question mainly pertains to things of that nature, like the flow of creativity and stuff that's in resonance just being thrown at you, where it's not just random anymore as it once was, but it's like you're feeding this algorithm, God, whatever you want to call it, all of the data of what you are in resonance with, and they're just getting better and better and better at finding similar things, being like, oh, Donnie's gonna like this. Put it on my phone, put it on my computer, whatever. And I see a ton of value in that. Where I don't kind of know where we're heading is, as machine learning gets more and more powerful and as these AI algorithms are deployed, particularly like, there's a big conversation going on last year about the metaverse. Obviously that whole thing hasn't come to fruition yet, but we know that it will, right? Once the technology gets to where it actually needs to be, and Zuckerberg quits trying to rush it. And so like when the AI algorithms can use those same data points and create an avatar, let's just say, for example, like Facebook or whatever algorithm knows what type of woman you're attracted to, like what your type is, what hair color, what this, that, eye color, whatever. It's going to create an avatar that is going to fit that profile and come pitch you on a product using the kind of language models based on the way that you speak, type, and write on the internet. It's going to pitch you a product so amazingly that you're going to have no idea that you're being pitched on something. And like, that level of that freaks me out, but only being served ads that are relevant to the shit that I'm into, like, doesn't freak me out at all. I'm honestly really grateful for that. I hope that answered your question.
Yeah, dude. I think it's really cool with the music lens, because it's a vibe, and the algorithm can understand your vibe and the resonance, like you talked about. Because I'm somebody that, my parents didn't really listen to music. I wasn't really exposed to music when I was younger, and so I don't know a ton about music or what, but I like the energy of music. Like if you're playing and somebody else is like the DJ, I like good music. Like I vibe with, I love dancing and I love music. And so Spotify has changed the game for me. Like I don't need to go search for songs for hours to find things that I like. I can literally start listening, and then it's just like feeding me more songs, and it allows me to expand into all this different music. So I love that lens too. And yeah, the flip side of that with where things are going, I mean, that it's really quite crazy, because they have, like, we're all, like, they know how we tick. And so there's like all these unconscious bias and ways that they can trigger the psyche to get us to fall for all these different ways. And so I think that's even more important why like developing these tools on this path that we're on of like finding center and finding stillness. And really, I think the real only thing you can do to counter that is get back to the earth and get back to the source of your food and, letting go of like all of that whole system and structure. It's just a really fascinating time that we're moving into.
Yeah, no doubt. And one of the things that I talk about a lot on here is how interesting it is that the advent of AI is running directly parallel to a worldwide psychedelic renaissance. It's like two massively separated polarities in one sense. It's like if we play that game right, we might be able to collapse the polarity between them and like learn better ways to integrate machine learning into society and into our own psyches, and particularly like what not to do, as so many people are arguing for right now, is like this regulation shit on AI has to happen like now before the bad triggers get pulled, like, like, and might help our decision making process. That's why I'm so grateful that even just over the last couple of years, the taboo nature of psychedelics and what they can be used for and utilized for, even apart from PTSD and treatment resistant depression and medical diseases of that nature, medical diseases as termed by the health organizations, like just for creativity and for tapping into those latent aspects of the mind and for developing a better sense of direction and what should, could, or shouldn't be done. Like the fact that that's being like societally and culturally accepted on a much larger scale, exponentially larger scale than just a few years ago, thanks to incredible institutions like MAPS and Johns Hopkins and all these places publishing this amazing literature that's undeniable at this point. Nobody can say, well, that's drugs. No one can say that anymore because the literature's out and it's inarguable. So that argument died a couple of years ago. So the fact that that's coming out with like alongside this AI thing is just mind-boggling to me. And it just seems like a movie script, dude. Like you can't make this shit up, that these timings are just right next to each other like this. So it's going to be really, like you said, it's going to be really interesting to see how this all plays out. And I don't know, man, because I follow AI, and so first, you have like these large language models that came out, like ChatGPT, obviously, and it is insane. GPT-4 just came out recently at the time that we're recording this, and it is 10,000.
I like that you said that because it's literally evolving.
Yeah.
Like
No,
daily.
I know. By the time someone watches this in a few months from now, it'll be the next, right? And so the difference in 3.5, which was what everyone was introduced like on a mass scale, that's what most people first saw of GPT, was 3.5, and 4 is that 4 is trained on a gazillion more parameters, and it can write in seconds like really long form content, which means that it can write things like entire movie scripts or entire books like very quickly. So the difference between those two technologies is massive. And then now we're also having these voice cloning technologies that are rapidly, over the last like 2 months even, like rapidly getting better and expanding, and can clone singers' voices. There's already some lawsuits going on right now. I just read this morning that some scammer like sold a bunch of fake music made with Frank Ocean's voice and made a ton of money doing it. There's all kinds of, so you can clone the president's voice, whatever. So whenever those two technologies merge and you have ChatGPT, speaking in Donald Trump or Joe Biden's voice or whatever, it's just shit is going to get so weird. And then you combine that with video and the deep fakes, and like, we're not going to know what's real anymore. And then that's also going to probably serve like, one just example, like in the politicians' benefit in some regard, because if they say some shit that ends up killing their ratings, they're just going to be like, well, that was a deep fake. That wasn't, like whatever. These are all like just weird possibilities that click in my brain about this technology. But yeah, I mean, like you said, it's going to be wild.
It's wild. Yeah, I think that like it's fascinating to think how that's all aligning to this, the potentials for this collective awakening that's taking place. And it's, when I think about that and feel into it, it's almost like it's literally like infinite realities happening simultaneously. And it's even the algorithms, right? Like it's creating these echo chambers where people are getting all fired up and they're communicating with other people that are in alignment with them, and they actually don't know what's going on with this group. And so there's like all these pods, and you get to a point where, like you're talking about, all this content, we don't know what's real. It's if you don't have a grounded, spiritually mature understanding of self, it literally, what that could lead to as like a psychological break collectively. It's almost as if that may be a piece to this paradigm that we're shifting to, like a collective death rebirth, where we get into a state of psychosis because we literally don't know what's real, and the only option is to actually unplug, get your feet in the dirt, and what's real is right here in front of you, like where you're standing, and being radically present with that. It's like almost like the technology is going to force us back into that, because the other choice is like psychosis.
Right.
Really.
Exactly. And what you just said makes me think back to your question about the algorithm, because oftentimes on social media, like Instagram, particularly Instagram, Facebook too, but it seems like more prevalent in Instagram, is that the algorithm does do exactly that, meaning create echo chambers, because it's only giving you the content of the people who share the notions that you share with. And you know what I'm saying? So that's definitely I mean, it's got pros and cons, sure, but it's definitely also a weird thing that in some sense kind of serves to like digitally tribalize people's beliefs or mindsets or whatever. Echo chambers are a dangerous thing, dude. I mean, in some senses, when the thing that's echoing is, you know, something that you should definitely have a wider viewpoint on, I've definitely seen some weird echo chambery vibes happening in different Facebook groups and just like social media in general, that is just like kind of wild. And, you know, I think COVID played a huge part in demonstrating that to the world, just how much of real life consequences that those types of dialogues and discourses can have when people are refusing to allow something else into the field at all costs. You know what I'm saying?
God damn, man. It's fascinating times we're leaving.
I know. And so like that kind of brings me back to what we were talking about, because like as it pertains to your journey, like at some point in your journey, it seems like your focus shifted from like, you know, how far can I push or expand the performance of my body to how far can I expand the performance of my mind. And we'll jump back into plant medicine in a little bit. But first, I saw in an interview where you were talking about your appreciation of meditation largely being focused on mindfulness throughout daily life, like rather than some rigid practice of just sitting down to do this thing and letting that be what you think of when you think of meditation. And I vibe really deeply with that, because that's obviously the goal of any meditation practice ultimately, is to bring that level of presence into the rest of your day and the rest of your life. So like, love you to riff for a second on like how meditation originally entered your field, and like what the rewards have been for you, and like where that's taken you, and what kind of meditations you're into, if any.
Yeah, man. Meditation is an important and powerful tool, and I think that's the whole point, right? Is taking the meditation off the mat and into your everyday life. I mean, if you're able to, like, the only place you're finding stillness and presence is on your mat, then you're not really. What are you doing it for? You know, you're not doing it to actually make your life better and integrating it into who you are as a human being. And it's a process, man. I think, you know, the thing I'm sure you hear a lot, and I've heard a lot, is, you know, I don't know, like people say, I don't know if I'm doing it right. I got to sit down and I can't not think, or my mind's crazy, so I don't do it. You know, that's the whole point of it, right? Like you're going to realize how much your mind is uncontrolled and out of whack, and these thought loops, and it always gets a lot harder before it gets better with meditation. And I'm really grateful, because when I started meditating, you know, it was pitched to me as this really grounded kind of performance based mindset training, and not really a spiritual thing. And then as I started to expand and learn about the CTE stuff and the creating more neural pathways and neural connections, and understanding meditation is a great way to do that, it gave me this extra motivation to continue showing up and doing it even when I didn't want to. And, you know, I used, early on, I used like an app like Headspace that really helped, because it kind of gamified it. Like I wanted to do those streaks, and I wanted to sit down, and it was, you know, I remember setting my timer when I first started for like 5 minutes, and I would sit there and I would just, like, it was counting my breaths, right? So I used my breath to anchor in, and it was supposed to count to 10 and then start back at 1. And I would find myself often like on 16, 17, and I'm like, holy shit, like how did I get to 17? Like I can't even count to 10 without losing track and getting lost in my thoughts. And what I realized about meditation is it's not about clearing the mind. It's about coming back to the present moment, and it's like reps. And so I was taught it's like working out, right? As somebody that's physical, as an athlete, the way to grow muscle, if I'm doing curls, is in the rep of the curls, actually tearing the muscles so that it can build. And so if you look at meditation, it's not trying to reach a certain goal or outcome, but you look at it as every time I recognize that my awareness is out of the present moment and I'm lost in thought, just to come back to the breath. And that's the tool, that's the practice. And so when you can figure that out as a tool, you get stronger. And so now when I'm in my everyday life, I have a strong awareness of when I'm lost in a thought loop or my mind takes me off something, and connecting that with the somatic understanding of my nervous system and how thoughts and emotions are connected. And if I get triggered in my body and then my mind starts running a loop on making sense of why I'm triggered in my body, and whether it's anger or sadness or fear, I can recognize the connection because I have an awareness of it. And so it creates this kind of third eye view of the witnesser. And then when you have the witnesser, you can actually look at the different aspects of what's happening. And when you have emotional awareness starting to play into that, and the ability to feel your emotions and go into them and explore them, then you can start working the magic and integrating all this stuff into, okay, these are tools for me to really let go and find stillness and peace in my everyday life, and being with what is as well. Like, it's not about bypassing all the things and reaching these higher levels of awareness and going and sitting on a mountain meditating for 8 hours a day. Like, that's not the life I want to live. I want to be in this reality, and I feel called to be a bridge that, with all the stuff with technology that we're talking about and the potentialities. And I love what you said somewhere in there. You said there's a real chance of the way technology is infused with some of these lower vibrational frequencies like greed, power, control. That's when it gets really scary. But you couple in, the psychedelic renaissance and this spiritual maturity that's happening, and this evolution and this potentiality for collective awakening. Those technologies, if we infuse them with these higher frequencies of gratitude, of collaboration, of joy, of creation from a place of abundance, like we have the technology to create an age of abundance where everything mundane will be taken care of and everybody should be taken care of. But it's this idea of artificial scarcity and lack that is, so infused in the culture and society that we live in. And it's a spiritual like feeling. It's this, when we're empty inside and we feel like we're lacking something, we're going to search for that thing outside of ourselves. And if we can really connect with that frequency of abundance and then infuse our technologies with that, that's what I have hope for. And it's really, really exciting. But the potentialities of where we're going now and why these tools are so important, why it's so important to find grounded, centered, and presence within yourself is like all this stuff we're talking about. Because the potentiality is on one spectrum, it's, collective awakening, age of abundance, and it's going to be the best time in human history, literally overlaying the kingdom of earth on heaven, which a lot of prophecies talk about in all these different philosophies and religions. But then there's the other side of that, which is the potential of driving straight off the cliff and total global destruction. And it could be anything in between. It's a holy cow, that's really overwhelming. What can I do? Well, you can learn to breathe, and you can learn to meditate, and you can learn to find stillness and get your feet in the dirt. And the really fascinating thing about the magic we were talking about early in the synchronicities, when you do that, you start realizing what people, what experiences, maybe it's your job, maybe it's the place you live, is throwing you off center. You can start having a bigger awareness of that. And when you start finding that stillness, yeah, it might get harder before it gets easier. But if you stick with that, that's when the resonance and the coherence, you'll start attracting people that are of the same wavelength, like you talked about. Like, I love that. And when that starts happening, holy cow, then you feel supported, then you feel inspired, then you feel like you can really, like really dream into what is possible and feel a lot safer and more grounded through that, because you're with a community of people that are really, dreaming the same dream into existence from these higher frequency states.
Yeah, exactly. Dude, yes to all of that. That was, yeah. And I love what you said about meditation as well, because I try to stress that too. And I am of the same opinion that being introduced to meditation through an entirely non-dogmatic framework is like key for Westerners to like have the motivation and the will to follow through with figuring it out and like knowing what it is that you're doing. And I really appreciate the framework that the Law of One provides about meditation. And it speaks of it very similar to what you were saying. The Law of One talks about meditation as essentially learning to disidentify like yourself from the thought forms of the mind in order to be able to like witness the endlessly complex play of the mind and like recognize that you are not your thoughts, and that instead thoughts are like phenomena that emerge inside the space of your own present moment awareness. And like it says, like the mind can be seen, the real you cannot be seen, for the same reason that the eyeball cannot see itself, because the real you is doing the seeing, the real you is the seer. And like it's really, until you enter these spaces of intentional awareness, you can live your whole life without realizing that very simple statement to be true. And so like whenever you take those times and you go through that process, and like you do that apart from any spiritual framework or dogmatic way of thinking, you're literally utilizing the focusing of your awareness from this spread out fog light of consciousness in our like high stimulus Western lives into like a coherent laser beam, and you're focusing your awareness onto a single point or object of meditation. It doesn't matter what it is. If it's a leaf on a tree, if it's your breath, if it's you're looking at someone else's eyes, like whatever, you are witnessing what that awareness even is when you can get it coherently focused on something, like what your thoughts actually are. And like you said, like it doesn't matter what the thing is, because all you're doing is going in to understand that you are the witness of these thoughts playing out. And like you said, you're not going to be great at this, maybe ever, definitely not at first. And the point isn't to be great at it. The point is to do it. It's a workout. Like you said, you just shorten the time as you drift and drift and drift. And these thoughts come in as clouds. You're like, oh, fuck, I'm supposed to be there. Okay, I'm here. All right, I'm back. And then it's immediately just, and you're like, oh, fuck, I'm back. Okay. And like, that is the reps. I like the rep analogy, because that's exactly what it feels like. It's like these mental reps. And honestly, like the benefits of doing that on a regular basis really can't be articulated, in my opinion. And I think that's why it's really tough to motivate people to like start doing this up front. And because like it's so often attached to, like you were saying, like Buddhism or some kind of framework that's just like, and these are all great frameworks, but a lot of times it's really difficult for Westerners to like kind of initially align with ways of thinking that are so outside of our cultural context, to where if we can just explain it like, look, this is a practice that's going to allow you to understand how your own mind works, period. Like that's it. From a psychological perspective, I feel like, and like you said, I think it probably is a blessing that you were introduced to it that way. I was kind of opposite, but once I found that non-dogmatic way was like when I really, really started diving deep. And I've been doing this specific form of meditation lately called TWIM, Tranquil Wisdom Insight Meditation. Have you ever heard of it?
No, tell me
It's
more.
really interesting, dude. So like it's actually the only thing ever studied, shown clinically, to stimulate the brain's dopaminergic and opioid reward systems internally, with meaning no external stimulus whatsoever. So you're using your own focused internal awareness to literally release dopamine in the nucleus accumbens, in your reward circuitry. This was shown on MRIs with multiple participants who are experienced in this particular form of meditation. It's also called jhana meditation, JHANA. And it's a specific, and it's not like some crazy hard weird technique or anything like that, but you do get better at it over time. And it goes through these 8 phases of consciousness, which is like, really, again, when you hear this from like some kind of dogmatic framework, you're like, oh sure, it goes through 8 phases. Well, they put these people in these MRIs who are experienced jhana meditators. This is what got me into it after reading this published paper, because I was like, holy shit, that's fucking wild. So, and each time he would say, okay, I'm going to switch to the next jhana, because you do this at will. You start at the first jhana. Again, it's like phases of consciousness, the 8th being the highest, which is like non-dual awareness, which is like all mental chatter shuts off, da-da-da. And you experience non-duality, like similar to the 5-MeO DMT experience. And so when I was reading the paper initially, I was like, no way, because the participant in the MRI would say, okay, I'm going to switch to the next jhana or whatever. And they would distinctly see changes in the MRI readings as he was doing these things. And anyway, so like the point of this meditation is to help rewire your dopamine neurocircuitry and your reward circuitry, because and the guy who I learned this from talks about dopamine as like an agitation molecule. And I think all of us, not all of us, I can't say that, but very many of us here in the West and in America in particular have dopaminergic dysfunction for one reason or the other, whether it's a phone addiction or this kind of addiction or something. We tend to seek dopaminergic release in our brains probably far too often, and in ways that sometimes are not healthy, obviously. So it's like, if you can quell that itch, and the guy Liam who I learned this from is like, viewing dopamine as an agitation molecule. He's like, well, is it not better to not itch in the first place than to constantly feel like you have to scratch an itch to get that moment of relief? And it's like, I really love that analogy, because it was like, okay, because when you can view, and a lot of other places kind of talk about the polarity between dopamine and serotonin, as dopamine being associated more with immediate gratification and that monkey in our brains, and serotonin being associated more with like true long-term fulfillment. And it's no coinky dink that most drugs of abuse, hard drugs, whether it's meth or cocaine or whatever, even opiates, really affect the dopaminergic system. And most psychedelics are serotonergic in nature, almost exclusively. There are a few exceptions to that, certain psychedelics that operate on different receptor systems like salvia and stuff like that. But when we're talking about things like mescaline and ayahuasca and psilocybin, these are all serotonergic substances. So it's like, I found that really interesting. And anyway, so I started doing this meditation, and it's really interesting. So you kind of have this, your object of meditation is joy. So you think internally only, and you have your eyes closed for this whole process of a sight or something that brings you joy. Whether it's like, if you have a kid, they say like, use your baby's face, like visualize your baby's face. If you have a puppy, like use a puppy. If you have this crazy moment in your life, like the day you got drafted into the NFL, you're going to keep that on your mind. Like if that's like, that pinnacle moment, like, and you use this process called the 6 R's as a means of returning to it over and over. And when you get good at this, you start feeling yourself cause this dopaminergic response. And by the time you get to the third jhana, your body literally floods with dopamine, and you literally feel this crazy physical pleasure sensation. And so when I was reading about that,
like super euphoric.
Yeah. And I was like, man, am I going to be able to do this though? Like, because like, they're saying like, these are experiences in this meditation, this particular meditation, these people who are in these MRIs are very experienced. And I'll be damned if I didn't get it on like the second or third try, dude. And I've been doing it daily since then. And it's really, really an interesting form of meditation for anybody who's listening and has been, wanting to. I recommend watching it's TWIM. You can also get it on the FitMind app, which in my opinion, I've tried a bunch of meditation apps, and FitMind is my absolute favorite for like a non-dogmatic, non-spiritual, highly detailed and instructional audio guided meditations that are also attached to lessons where Liam explains to you like why you're doing a certain technique, what it does as it pertains only to understanding how your mind works. Like, this is not spiritual in nature. Obviously, you guys who are watching this know I'm all about that spiritual jazz, but for this particular thing, this is, I think it's more constructive to approach it from this lens. But yeah, anyway, I wanted to share
super
that.
Grounded.
Yeah.
It's TWIM?
TWIM? Yeah, it stands for Tranquil Wisdom Insight.
I'm going to check that.
Yeah.
I'm going to check that. Yeah, man, I think the dog with the itch thing was really powerful, because if you're trying to not itch the itch, then that's taking energy and willpower to not do that. And if you're wasting energy on trying to be abstinent from whatever your thing is, then you're actually not having enough energy, which depletes your willpower, which will show up in other ways of your life. And so just getting to the root of letting that go fully by being able to access that, I'm giving that a try.
Nice. Hell yeah, dude. Yeah, you won't regret it. Yeah, no doubt. And I've noticed a difference in myself already. And Man, it's just it's borderline sad, but it's also inevitable, or was inevitable, with the advent of technology and social media, to like think about how dysregulated our dopamine functioning actually is. And as you can see, it's getting worse and worse as short form content becomes bigger and bigger, because dopamine is directly tied to attention span. So like it's only going to get further dysregulated the shorter and shorter and shorter these platforms create things and mechanisms of keeping our attention wired for very strongly for a short period of time. And so, and then, there's tons of other things that fuck with our dopamine systems, obviously. And technology is a big one of those things. And anyone who hasn't seen The Social Dilemma, or if you have seen it, then you know what I'm talking about as it pertains to that. And it's just, that's another one of those things that's going to get really interesting as it pertains to the whole parallel, advent of the psychedelic renaissance versus the AI and the algorithms. And it's like, well, because, dude, the reality is, like, there's a whole generation of children right now who have far worse dopaminergic function than we did when they were their age. And it's the direct result of the technology that they have in their hands. When I was in high school, luckily, I didn't have an iPhone. That happened like right after I got out. So I couldn't imagine like being 13 or something and having access to everything that these kids are just like, it's part of their life now. Like they couldn't go without it, or they believe that they couldn't go without it, So it's like, it's going to be interesting to see how that's healed or dealt with over time.
Yeah, even us, I struggle with it, and I'm a very grounded, connected practice in meditation and done all the things. And I feel like I'm very centered, and I still struggle with looking at my phone far too often and getting drawn in. And yeah, to be a fucking 12, 13-year-old with no grounded sense of self at all, to be lost in that, it's a very frightening and sad thing. And I don't know how you turn that back. I mean, I've heard them talking about the AI thing. Like we're still in a place where we can stop it before it gets into a place like social media. Like social media, we can't turn off. It's literally ingrained in the very fabric of our society and culture. If we all of a sudden shut social media off somehow miraculously, like that would lead to total anarchy and chaos, because people's livelihood is literally like built on top of these platforms. And it's too late. But it's not too late for the potentials of what AI could be. And I think we're in a very fascinating, even few months. Like it's not like, oh, we have a couple years, like the few months, because they're starting to roll this stuff out. And they're rolling it out because this uber capitalism competition. If one company is like, okay, we'll stop because we see the dangers, but what that's going to give this other company a chance to get ahead of us. And so it's interesting to think, even if they do come together, it's going to have to be from this place of like humanity. And maybe that's the thing that brings us all together, is this common, it doesn't need to be an enemy, but this common concern around the potentialities of this thing and what it could do to the entire human race. Maybe that's what ends war and creates this time of peace of, hey, we need to come together and actually make a decision collectively that this is something we need to really tread lightly with. And it's still up for debate on whether that happens or not.
And I think that one of the main things to look out for there is, obviously everybody with a properly dialed moral compass wants what you just said to be the way out of whatever this status quo is that we want to call it. But it's like the thing I always go to, and that's just like, and I'm not trying to sound discouraged here, but it's like the people who are in power historically will do whatever it takes to stay in power. So it's like, it's going to be really interesting to see how that plays out, though, because now that we're living and moving into the age of information, where everything is inherently connected in a way that these institutions most of the way can't really censor to the degree that they would probably like to, is like we are planting the seed for the ability for the public to, and societies at large, to like outnumber and not be shunned of information, or squeezed of information. And I mean, just think about it, dude. Like 30 years ago ish, like if you wanted to learn something about something, like you had to go to the library and get a book and check up, like find the book, hopefully, that's on your time. Like that's a totally different existence than we have now. And a lot of the same,
Yeah, we can't even comprehend what that's
I know. Like I still remember when my mom, when I was a kid, would like have to like use a map to get around. And then it went from that, dude, my mom was so stoked when MapQuest came out. And instead of using a map, you could just print out a bunch of pages that told you turn for turn, like where to go. And that was like the greatest thing that ever happened, because she doesn't have to look at a map anymore. and just like just
Yeah,
seeing how
dude.
shit's evolved since then. But it's like, I think that it empowers people a lot. So, and I think that those seeds, though, those seeds of like societal empowerment are still very much getting planted right now. Like we can't really like reap the benefits of that just yet, but it feels like we're getting closer. And you can look at the world governments and see that they're struggling to maintain the status quo. The Federal Reserve is struggling to maintain the illusion of the strength of a dollar. Like everything is beginning, the facade is getting clearer and clearer and more see-through, but I don't think that's like an overnight thing. It feels like it's going to be a slow burn to like really see the effects and the consequences of people waking up on a large collective scale. But it's going to be interesting, dude.
Yeah, I think it's interesting what you just talked about with the. I think and on one level it's going to feel like it's taking time, but on another level it's going to feel like it happens like that, because you think about the MapQuest thing and going to the library and book. I mean, that was 30 years ago. I mean, there's people that are alive now that lived before the internet, and now we're living with AI and how fast that happened. So yes, it's going to feel like day to day, like, okay, but there's going to come a time when there's this like flood of awareness and awakening. It could happen like in the snap of a finger as well. So I think it's going to feel a little bit faster than that. And it's already happening, and it's really cool to like, I like launched the Härt Collective, and there's these all these applications coming in, and these people that are really answering the call, because I put this real amazing hero video out that was really well produced, and it's just triggering this real emotional connection to where we're at and the paradigm shift we're moving through. And it's been really cool to see, there's people that are on the path, there's people that are like just curious, and they're like, I just know there's something more out there. And it's really encouraging to see people from all walks of life like fit for service, right? Like it's such a diverse group of people. It's what connects us all is that resonance and that frequency and that wavelength, like you talked about. And that's what connects all of us as humanity, is the frequency that we're embodying. And so if we keep holding that frequency as individuals, there's not really anything we have to do. It's how we be, and it's that frequency of holding that. And that literally can bring people around you into coherence and resonance. And the more people that do that, it's like little like tuning forks all over the world, and then the frequency just comes into resonance all of a sudden. It's gonna be, it's like, what a journey.
I know,
man.
we really are living in like the most interesting time, and particularly our generation. Another thing I talk about all the time is like how we're like probably the last generation that is going to remember what it likes, like pre iPhone and pre iPad, and then like having to come inside when the street lights come on and playing two-hand touch in the street. And like, I don't even see that going on anymore, but like, it's really cool because we are going to be the generation that like we think of our parents or whatever as like pre-internet and internet, they got to live through that, but we're going to be like pre-AI, post AI, and that one's going to probably be orders of magnitude more of a paradigm shift, even though the internet was such a shift. But this is the notion of the singularity that Terence McKenna used to always talk about, which is like world changing, paradigm altering technological advancements, the time between them getting smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller and smaller until boom, you hit this singularity where it's like every day, every minute, whatever, you're coming across like a world altering advancement of some sort. And that is precisely what machine learning is opening the door for. That maybe humanity, just because of the nature of how our minds operate and our analysis, like do something, analyze the results, make changes, do something, analyze the results. This can all be done in seconds or less by these machine learning algorithms. So it's like they can just test their own theories like this in a spinning wheel. It doesn't stop. And so it's like the notion of that singularity is becoming more and more real in my mind, because it's like, as I read more and more about how these machine learning algorithms work as it pertains to these like advancements in studying of ecosystems and like all these different things, manufacturing processes, all this shit. It's like, holy shit, like where is this going? I know we keep circling back to that, but it really is such a wild thing to just be able to live through and witness, and then just like eat some mushrooms and think about it and be like, man, just really, which also, because I know we don't have too much time left, like I wanted to dive in a little bit to your plant medicine experience. And it's interesting how the process of like the mind developing is equally a process of unlearning, like just as much as it is one of learning and unlearning associations and habits and patterns. And obviously at some point you must have felt the desire for this. And I'm just curious, like, what was the catalyst that made you initially say to yourself, like, okay, I'm going to go experience a plant medicine ceremony? And what was your first one? And well, before you answer
Yeah,
that,
man.
before you left the league, were you experienced with plant medicines or psychedelics or no?
I did my first MDMA experience socially with my girlfriend at the time, my 6th year in the league. And then my 7th year is when I did mushrooms and LSD for the first time. And then I retired my 8th year. So I was definitely socially experiencing them. I hadn't been really connected to the ritual process or the ceremonies or the indigenous, like, sacred plant medicines that I was really called to. And the first time I heard about ayahuasca was actually one of my teammates. He was telling me about his dad went down. This is like years before, like maybe decades before, he went down to Peru, and he was an alcoholic, and he came back and never touched alcohol again after this experience. And so I thought that was very fascinating. But there's all these stories, like, and this underlying fear of, like, what is these experiences like. And then I started listening to Aubrey talk about it, and like seeing these freaking dragons and all these different like visual things. I'm like, holy cow, like that's absolutely insane. And there was this calling, like I don't know any other way to put it. It was the synchronicities of, like I shared, I was in Tampa, and this girl I was connecting with, she was like, you want to go with me? And I felt into him, like, yeah, I do. I want to experience this. And, the first time, it was in Saltara actually in 2019. And the first time I experienced it, I really had a lot of trouble connecting with the medicine. Like, they do 4 ceremonies over a week span. And it wasn't until the final ceremony when I finally had just a glimpse of connection to the medicine and this real deep altered state. But what I realized through that experience was that this medicine is working on such a deep subconscious level, because that, although I didn't have all the visions that like Aubrey talks about, and what I realize now after working with a lot of plant medicines is I'm not a very visual person in those spaces, and that's okay. But I'm very somatic, and I would have very somatic healings and like a lot of energy moving through my body. And since I've worked with quite a bit of plant medicines, and I've had some of those visual experiences, but it's like a rare occasion for me in those spaces. And for me, I think that one of the big intentions, because naturally when I walked away from football, the big question is not only who am I, but what am I here to do? What's my purpose? And so I was using these spaces, but really seeking answers. I wanted to know. And that, coupled with this desire to seek the truth of what creation is, what God is. And, I grew up in this Christian faith, like I've alluded to before, and created a lot of resistance to that dogmatic, fear-based belief system. But I always had this intuition, this knowing, like, the creation, there's something greater than myself. Like, what is it? And so I went on this path of really seeking, and I kept going back to ayahuasca with this intention of, like, show me like what I'm here to do, show me what I'm here to do, like what's my purpose. And I think it was my 11th ceremony. It was actually that retreat with Aubrey and Vailana. And, I went to that retreat, and I didn't go with strong intentions. Aubrey put it out, and I was like, oh, this is a great chance to connect with Aubrey and, be in ceremony with them. And like, that was something that really was, one of my main reasons for going. And, I just wanted to connect with this guy on a real way. And like you said, it's hard to get in that space with him. And so going there, the first ceremony I went in, I had one of the most frightening experiences of my life. And as I've worked with ayahuasca, I realized I really metabolize it very slow. And so every experience before that, I would drink, a few cups of medicine, and I wouldn't have my experience until after the ceremony was closed. And then I would go into like a really deep experience, usually after I ate some food, because then it would start metabolizing. And so as I developed a relationship with the medicine, I'd bring a little banana in with me. And so I would drink medicine, and then like 30 minutes into the ceremony, I would just eat a little bit of banana, and then the medicine would be able to hit me during the ceremony. But when I went into that first ceremony, I was talking to the shamans, and they're like, anybody have anything? I'm like, hey, like, I've worked with the medicine enough to know that it hits me really slow. Can I, like, is there anything you can do for that? And they like kind of laughed. They're like, oh, you're a big guy, we'll just give you twice as much. I'm like, okay. And I went in there. This is a funny story. I walk into the Maloka and I sit down, and hoping that I'm one of the first people to go. And the shaman, when they open ceremony, walks to the person to my right, and then they go all the way around the other way. And so it takes a while. So it was like 45 minutes into ceremony, and then they gave me twice as much. And so literally like 6 hours into ceremony, they closed ceremony, and I'm like walking back to my room, and it just, all the medicine just like hits me, and I'm like, oh shit, like I'm about to go into this experience. So I go into my room, and I'm by myself. I lock the door, and I go into this, one of the most frightening experiences of my life, where I was really experiencing this loss of sense of self. And I kept getting blasted off into this primordial void. And in that process, I'd come back into my body, and I'd be like, okay, like I'm here in this room, like this will pass, like I'm getting through it. And then boom, I would get blasted off again. And I got to a point where I would be back in my body, and I didn't like remember who I was. Like I was just like, why am I here? Like, who am I? And in that process, when I was in that primordial void, it was like a dream state, and every single thought form that would come out of my mind, it would start creating entire realities around me. And it was really fascinating. But it would, like, as I would go deeper into these journeys of these different realities, I would start losing the anchor back to myself. And that's why I would come back into my body, because I'm like, okay, whoa, like I'm here. And then I would go back in. And when I was in that process, it was really profound, because I had this experience. I asked myself the question, like, why am I here? And I realized I'm here because I want to know the answer of the secrets of the universe. And I want to know what my purpose is. And what I realized in that moment, that I experienced very viscerally, obviously, is I'm the creator of worlds. And I was literally creating with my thoughts entire realities around me. And in that moment, I realized, oh, I am infinite potential. I'm experiencing it right now. I am the creative life force that creates worlds. And when I came back into my body the next morning, it was the first time out of all my plant medicine, because I'm a strong like warrior, dude. Like I can go in deep. I'm a psychonaut. I can explore these realms. That was the first time I had to go talk to the, one of the facilitators. That I need some support in integrating this. Like this was really intense. And through that process, it really taught me a lot about having a lot of reverence for these medicines and how powerful they are, and not to just go use them to seek and explore and chase something and try to get an answer. All of that lives within me. And so now I don't go to these experiences seeking for something to fill a void within myself, because I've realized that I have all the tools within me. I now really sit with the calling of why I'm being called into a certain experience and what I'm being called to learn. And I see these plants as powerful allies and powerful teachers, and they have so much wisdom to share. And so I'm not seeking, like my energy shifted big time from like wanting to go all these experiences so that I can have the experience. And part of my ego wants to share like the cool, like experience that I had to make me feel like, whatever it is. Now I have such a deep reverence for them, and I'm not seeking them. And it's been really beautiful, because I have been called back to ayahuasca. I have been called to working with wachuma. I don't do, mushrooms as much. I use them in microdosing settings, but it's really when I'm called to learn, and these things are ready to teach me something, that I'm called back. But I'm really grateful that I'm a lot more grounded in that, because I had to go through that experience of really chasing these altered states to realize like everything I need is right here, right now, and this is why I'm here. Yeah.
It's one of the most interesting things about ayahuasca in particular too, that I find is it is a very self-regulating thing. When you get off track, like you're saying in your why, it shows you and gets you back on real quick. You don't have to do anything. It does that for you. So what is kind of your biggest transformations in the day-to-day life and everything since you as a result of these journeys? Like, what have you been able to, if you could, obviously a lot of times these things aren't articulatable, but if you could condense it into a couple of nuggets or bullet points, what would you say that they've done for you?
Man, there's so much to explore there. We could probably do a 3-hour podcast and all the different lessons and journeys, but I feel called to share my most recent, journey down to Peru with Jason and Megan, and we worked with one of Jason's teachers and medicine carriers down there, which was really beautiful. It was the first time I went down to like the motherland and connected with the spirit of. We worked with wachuma, and that's where the cactus is from, and just as soon as I got there, like just connecting with the spirits of the land and the frequency of those mountains, and working with that medicine. And that was all the plant medicine I've done and all the different ceremonies, that was the really one of the only ones I had a very clear why and knowing why I was going down there. And it was revolved around this fear of rejection that I was uncovering. And what I realized is I've lived with this deep seated root that all of my real trauma and experience of life was laid on top of, and it was this fear of rejection. And it's coupled because of, the religious upbringing I had. I felt unworthy of God's love, so I felt rejected by him, and that was reflected through my parents and their belief around who God is and what it's like to be a good person. And so, there's this concept of the golden shadow. A lot of people in this space talk about shadow work, and it's like the darker aspects of self that you feel shame around, unworthy. But there's this idea of the golden shadow where the best aspects of who you are can also be in the shadow. And so realizing I have this big heart, I have so much to give, I have a lot of strength and power and a lot of purpose to bring that to the world. But all of that, what I realized, was in my shadow because I was rejecting it, because I had this fear of being rejected by others. And I had this experience with my dad like a month before I went down to this trip. And I was basically asking him for some support in certain ways. And he basically told me, like, he basically rejected me. And I sat with that, and it was like, it brought up all this anger and rage. And what I realized is, holy cow, I have had this fear of rejection my whole life because I want my parents to accept me, love me, see me, and just know me for who I am. And they decide not to, out of their own fear and out of their own stories and their own unwillingness to know themselves. But what that done is, because I have such a fear of being rejected by them, that I was rejecting that part of myself. And so I went down to Peru to really work on that fear of rejection. And the beautiful, like, Wachuma is so subtle and it's so beautiful, and it held me and allowed me to feel safe enough to access all of this grief that I was feeling around this rejection wound. And I really, this psychological process of the projection of who I needed my parents to be, I knew I had to let them die. And that was akin to a very real experience of what would it be like if they actually died. And so I went to this experience, and the medicine helped me grieve the loss of my parents in a very visceral, real way. And in that process, I was able to access this profound freedom for the first time, a deeper level of freedom. And I remember I had this moment when I was up in it's called Puma Lake. It's this very sacred lake on the top of this mountain that we hiked up, and it was just such a pilgrimage. And I had this moment where I grabbed this rock and I spoke into it all of the fear, all the scarcity, all the doubt, all the worry. I spoke into it all the energy of my parents, and I felt really called to like really speak all the things I wanted to let go of into this rock, and I threw it into the lake. And as soon as the rock hit the lake, I just broke down and just started grieving and wailing and just letting all this energy go. And after that process was complete, I was walking back to the group, and I literally felt for the first time what real abundance is. I could feel every fabric of reality, like the grass, the rocks, the clouds, the air, the birds, the animals, everything in my life, how much it actually loved me, how much it wanted me to succeed, how much it wanted me to be successful and embodied and reaching for my highest potential. Like, everything in the universe in that moment was like, we love you to the depths of all of it, and we want to support you. And I was like, this is what abundance is. This is so powerful. And, going through that experience was one of the most profound experiences of my life. And, coming back from that, the real work comes online of like, how do I integrate this? And for a few weeks, I was oscillating between deep scarcity and then like letting it go in deep expansion. And as I was oscillating, it was very intense because I could feel the depth of the scarcity that I was still holding on to, and then let it go and then be able to expand. And so I've been able to like create spaciousness and like lean on that experience. And it's not like it just was, I was relieved of it. I had to work on it and integrate it. And I'm still very much in that process of trusting and having faith and really learning to create more sacred space in my life and more ritual to connect with the love that I know this life has for me. And when I am in a state of scarcity, it's because I am pushing that away and refusing that support from the universe and from the frequencies around me.
Dude, yeah. Thank you for sharing that. Those really thorough shares of that entire process, people really find them useful when we speak them out and share them. I get messages all the time. I had a very similar theme last year with my ayahuasca sits, revolving around that self-acceptance and self-love and dealing with that fear of rejection, kind of like you were talking about. And it's really a process of realizing that you're your own worst enemy with these distorted beliefs that we choose to hold, that are really just responses to things that happened earlier in life. And like, these medicines are so powerful at showing you that in a way that it is entirely undeniable, and in a way that doesn't do it for you, but it shows you the action steps that you would have to take in order to relieve yourself of these distortions. And people really, really enjoy hearing. I really still enjoy hearing stories exactly like what you just told. And also, shout out Jason and Megan holding it down in the swamp. Two of the most amazing human beings I know. I'm so honored to call them friends. And yeah, man, that was a solid share. I'm glad that you're first. And you were drinking that Peruvian cactus, huh? The high altitude.
Yeah, dude. So
Yeah,
potent.
yeah, that's a totally different thing. Yeah, man.
Yeah, man. I'm so grateful I got to go down there, and it's my first. Like, I've drinking ayahuasca in Costa Rica. I've done some stuff locally in the States, but to go down to Peru, it's just the energy of the lineage and the spirits of the land. Is there's something so potent and special about it.
No doubt. So, man, this has been an incredible conversation. Before we start bringing this home, I wanted to give you the floor to like tell people a little bit about Härt Collective and what it is that you're putting together and what your whys are. And I checked out the website. It looks like a really awesome offering. And just if you want to dive into that for a bit.
Yeah, thanks, brother. I really appreciate it. I think the power of community, from experiences like Fit for Service and all the ceremonies and different healing experiences, all the group work, men's work, yoga, summits, like all of these things I experienced have had a profound impact on my life. And really the community that is formed around it is I believe what everybody is really missing and everybody is really thirsty for. And I truly believe with all the things we talked about, like how do we navigate this great shift and transition, I truly believe community is the currency of the future. As systems collapse and things shift, the power of the dollar goes, like literally, we don't know what that's going to be like. And so if you can find community and stay connected to that, you can really navigate these transitional times with a lot more space and safety and freedom. And so out of all the experiences I've done, one of the most powerful has been this river rafting expedition. I went on this river trip like 3 years in 2020, 3 years ago, and it was kind of deeper in my journey. And I had such a profound experience. And it was just a normal whitewater rafting multi-day trip. And I was like, holy cow, I had this vision when I was out there. I was like, if I could bring and do some more retreat programming and facilitated sacred space out on this river, like this has the potential to be a profoundly healing experience for people completely sober. And so I facilitated 2 of those the last 2 years. Actually, the founder of that company was on that trip with me, and I shared the vision with him, and he ended up partnering with me. And so he handles the expedition side, I handle the community and retreat side. And so this year, after kind of alchemizing all this lesson and all this work I've done over the last couple of years, I'm launching this community, and this community is really focused on serving high impact leaders, entrepreneurs, and influential visionaries, people who are actually have the ability and the desire to use their creations, their business, their leadership to facilitate and integrate all of this energy like we're talking about into culture. Not just, hey, we're going to go meditate or we're going to go have a spiritual community over here. I'm calling in the people who feel like they're bridges so that we can integrate this energy into our society and culture, and the people that have the ability to do that. And using, one of the things I found is you can't build community just because you want to build community. You can't just bring a group of people together, sit them in a room and expect them to drop in and form those bonds. You have to go through some type of experiential process, some type of rite of passage. And that was what was so powerful about Fit for Service is we went through these different experiences, a wide variety of them. But what they did is they stripped away the ideas of who we thought we needed to be or who we thought we are, and got to the point of, can we vulnerably share ourselves and have the courage to be seen and held and felt within community. And that's what created this energy, this magnetism, this frequency. And so in order to facilitate those unbreakable bonds of community, I'm using these whitewater rafting expeditions to create the foundation for that. And one of the things that I'm really excited about is this is not just a year-long transformational experience. One of the things that, how much I love Fit for Service, one of the things I really think they missed the mark on is really keeping the community together as a business ongoing and being able to leverage the power of a community for greater initiatives. So part of the intention of this community is not just, hey, come and have an experience and find family. it's like, okay, we go through this first year, we build the nucleus. How do we leverage the energy of this and the power of this community for greater initiatives in the world? So I have visions of integrating some Web3 technology, some shared community treasury, being able to invest in the community and then using those shared resources to invest in other initiatives, invest in other projects, invest in other businesses, so that as a collective, we can really start facilitating greater impact together in the world. And so that's all coming together. It's the Härt Collective. I don't know when this podcast is going to go live, but we're accepting applications through probably mid-June. We have 2 whitewater rafting expeditions this summer, one in June, one in August. So you'll go to that. And then we have a big summit in January where we'll bring the whole community together and do some more connection type experiences. And it's coming together really nicely. We have had over 100 applicants, some really dope humans coming together. And I'm just super grateful to be called to facilitate and to steward this vision that's coming through. And I feel like it's so much bigger than me, and being able to trust and see how it's unfolding has been the greatest gift of my entire life.
Hell yeah, dude. That all sounds amazing. And man, yes, I'm stoked to see how that unfolds for you too, bro. Well, Joe, this has been an awesome conversation, dude. Thank you so much for coming on. I really enjoyed this conversation. And you guys, everybody listening, check out the Härt Collective, listen to Joe's podcast, Life Beyond the Game. And yeah, if there's anything else that you want to direct people to before we bring this thing home, let's do it.
Yeah, bro, I appreciate you. Just really grateful for the conversation, man. Grateful for you, and stoked that we've finally connected, and excited to co-create and collaborate moving into the future. And that's what it's all about, is us coming together and really shining bright and bringing more and more people together. And I know you're on that path as well, man. So excited to see where this connection goes, and if there's anything I can do to support you. Excited to.
Likewise, brother. Thank you so much for doing this. Thank you, everybody, for listening, and we'll see y'all soon.